So let's talk about the role of professional codes. Corey and Callanan in the book Issues and Ethics in the Helping Relationships deals with ethics codes in the first chapter. So I want to talk about it a little bit this week. But we're not going to do a lot with the ethics codes this week. We'll do it toward the end of the course, just before we do some work around an ethical decision-making model. I think it's useful for you to have more information in the ethics course before we delve more thoroughly into the codes. So let's talk about it a little bit. This relates in a way to the previous lecture around why do we need to study ethics. And sometimes people will say, like, why do I need to follow an ethics code? Aren't my personal belief systems good enough? Aren't the sacred texts that guide my life good enough? Aren't my values about being a good and helpful person in the world enough? Well, though all of those things are important, the difficulty, though, with using these as our only guides is that each of us use many interpretive methods. So as a result, we're going to come to a point of various understandings in terms of how we would apply these beliefs or text to daily life, and then how that would inform our professional practice. So therefore, for professional associations and the college, it is important to have an ethics code that guides professional behavior. Most professional associations are in their third or fourth generation of ethics codes, and we'll talk about why that is a little later. In the last lecture, we talked about how relationships have the potential to be the context where healing and change can occur. And in our culture that we've set aside certain relationships where healing and change are facilitated. And as a result of that, we've also got expectations about what constitutes appropriate professional behavior. And the ethics codes are a very important tool as a way to create a common understanding and practice with regard to that understanding of what is appropriate professional practice. So ethics codes have three basic roles. The first one is to educate professionals about sound ethical conduct. The code of a particular association provides a framework for education, both in preparation for clinical practice and also through ongoing review. And often associations have a ongoing ethics module that members need to update themselves with. Ethical standards also provide a mechanism for professional accountability. The Code of Ethics for a particular association provides a guide for evaluating professional behavior. It is also accessible to the public and can be used to educate the public regarding what is appropriate ethical behavior. And the Code of Ethics is the standard which is used if a professional is charged with an ethical complaint. And thirdly, Code of Ethics serve as catalysts for improving practice. So it's not just something you read when you first are certified or when you get your RP status with a college and then you never look at again. The Code of Ethics is there to be used in an ongoing manner within your professional life in order to address new ethical issues or challenges for the profession. And it's also there for you to review to ensure its applicability for the needs of the members. Many associations have a peer review process that occurs periodically, which requires the member to report on continuing education activities and also participate in a brief workshop on ethics in order to remain current. And in fact, in my professional membership, when I pay my annual dues, I sign that I have read and understood the Code of Ethics. And so I take the opportunity at that point, if not at other points in the year, to read through the Code of Ethics, to simply bring it up to the top of my mind instead of being back there somewhere, and to remind myself of the code to which I am saying that I will abide by. And I would encourage you, when you're a professional, to do similarly. Ethics codes are there to safeguard the public and to guide professionals in their work so that they can provide the best service possible. And that's an important thing to recognize, that the code is there to protect you, most certainly as a professional, but even more so to protect the public. That being said, there are some problems that are inherent in the code, which are sometimes difficult to avoid. I think as we move through the course, you'll begin to see that some issues cannot be handled solely by relying on the code of ethics, because often codes do not contain everything that you need. In fact, as we read the codes, you'll see that there is some specificity in the code, but there are a lot of general principles and understandings that are stated, which means you as a professional need to begin to learn to think ethically, not just when you think there's an issue, but to look at your practice through an ethical lens always. And to develop a way of thinking, what is the best response here? And so when a code does lack clarity and precision, you have a way to think through a potential issue, and you have the ability to consult with colleagues or supervisors with regard to what would be an ethical response. Some codes lack clarity and precision, which sometimes makes enforcement difficult. This is often how codes get revised, is when associations bump into difficulties in responding to a proposed complaint because they discover the code isn't as clear as it needs to be. And then the association will make modifications to the code. This also means that codes tend to be reactive rather than proactive. To a certain degree, codes try to look ahead at what potential problems there might be. But in reality, it's when association runs into new issues or different slants on the issues that have been experienced before, where they find the code deficient, that means the code needs to be revised. So I'm hoping you're beginning to realize already that just learning the code of ethics or memorizing some kind of casebook is not going to prepare you for ethical practice. There is more to it than that. And this is particularly important in the many areas of code of ethics that does not address specific issues. And we'll have opportunities to talk about a lot of those in the course. We're going to look at a lot of different cases in the course. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to raise questions, to speak about difficulties that you're experiencing or that you think you might be experiencing as we learn together about ethics codes. Also, consumers of psychotherapy or spiritual care may not have the knowledge or expertise to determine whether or not a therapist or spiritual care provider is practicing ethically, and so they may never think about lodging a complaint because they might not recognize they could, or they might not recognize that what has just occurred is not ethical. So partly as professionals, we have a responsibility to be educating those we work with, both by modeling good professional behavior and also addressing concerns as they arise in our work as a way of educating those we work with. It's important for us to recognize the power imbalance that is inherent in the professional relationship and how this too will make it difficult at times for a client or patient or parishioner to lodge an ethics complaint against the person who they're working with. That is often extremely difficult for them. And we'll talk about power later in the course. At times, there may be a conflict between the code of ethics and an organization's code, and so it'll be important to address these conflicts when they arise. Or you as a practitioner might belong to multiple professional associations, and so you're responsible to practice within the framework of numerous codes of ethics, yet these codes may not be uniform. So you might be a member of CASC or the Art Therapy Association or CCPA or the Child and Play Therapy Association, and you're a member of the college or AMFT, and so there are multiple codes that you will need to keep track of. The most obvious example of this, and we'll see this when we look at the three codes in the course, is the amount of time that is required before a professional can have a romantic or intimate relationship with a previous client or student. In some codes, it is never allowed, while in others, there is a specific time that is specified before such a relationship can occur. And the difference often is rooted in their theoretical understanding to psychotherapy. And again, we'll talk more about it when we get to reading the different codes. However, all associations would say that it would be unethical to end a professional relationship with the sole purpose to become involved in a romantic relationship with a previous client. As noted earlier, ethics codes tend to respond to issues as they arise within the profession. Some things can be anticipated and are addressed proactively, but many things cannot be anticipated and so are addressed in a revision of the code, which occurs periodically. And by periodically, I'm saying like every 10 or 15 years, unless for some reason that's more urgent, it needs to be done more quickly. Codes of ethics aren't things that are edited frequently. You may find that your personal values conflict with a specific standard within a code of ethics. And then you as a professional are going to figure out how you're going to respond to it. Because all of us have our own beliefs regarding what constitutes harm to another, self-autonomy, supporting healthy choices, etc. And at times our own beliefs in this area may come in conflict with a particular part of the code. For example, we may feel that under certain circumstances, a person should, after due consideration, be able to take their own life. While we may personally hold this belief, it is important to know that as a professional, you will be required to abide by the Code of Ethics and the provincial and federal laws. If you choose to act on your own beliefs that are contrary to these, then it's important to know that there can be serious consequences for you making that choice on your ongoing professional practice. Now, certainly in our country, we are now looking at medically assisted death, but that has a very clear and structured process to go through. And again, if you as a professional acted in contravention of that, you likely would also be in contravention with your professional code, and it would be problematic. Okay, so sometimes institutions have standards of practice that may come into conflict with an association's code of ethics. When I was a member of the National Ethics Code for CAPE, as before the name was even changed, there was an instance when in the hospital downsizing process, a chaplain arrived to work to be called into their supervisor's office and handed their pink slip and escorted out of the hospital. The chaplain had no opportunity for any closure with staff, patients, or families. And as a National Ethics Committee, we felt this institutional practice violated our ethical standards regarding our role as pastoral counselors or spiritual care providers. We wrote a letter as a committee to the head of the institution raising our concerns regarding this institutional practice and how it placed the chaplain in a professionally compromised position. So ethical codes also need to be understood within a cultural framework and therefore must be adapted to specific cultures. The ethics codes that we'll look at in the course are all from a Canadian context. If you were a professional working in another country, you would need to consider what cultural issues would need to be reflected in their code. Also, as we read the three different codes, I think you'll get a sense of the culture of the association. As somebody who's going to be graduating from the degree and looking for professional associations, the code is often a good thing to read to get a sense of, is this an association I want to belong to? And also, because of the diverse viewpoints with any professional organization, not all members will agree with all proposed standards. The Code of Ethics for an association is presented for discussion and adoption at the association's annual general meeting. It is adopted by a majority vote. As a result, there may not be unanimous acceptance for every point within the code. However, once the code is passed by an association, the members of the association are accountable to the code, even if they personally do not agree with every element. So again, this is another important consideration when you're considering the professional association to join. Can you agree to uphold the behavior that is attested in the Code of Ethics? If you can't, then you need to look at that and decide whether or not this is an association you want to belong to. So thanks for looking with me about the role of professional codes. And as I said earlier, we will look at this again when we look at the codes later in the course.